A single dad picked up a black nurse in the rain, but she was hiding. Shocked him to his core. Welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your storyteller, James, and I hope you're doing well. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I always love knowing where my family is tuning in from. Now listen, this story, it begins with a single dad, a stormy night, and a woman hiding more than just her past. But I won't say more, because what unfolds will shock you, move you, and maybe heal a piece of your heart too. So promise me one thing, stay with me until the very end. And if my stories ever touched you, please subscribe and become part of this growing family. YouTube hides us sometimes, but real hearts always find their way home. Let's begin. Cole Matthews didn't usually drive this road, especially not on nights like this, when the rain poured so hard that it blurred everything into shadow, when the memories he'd buried clawed up from the corners of his mind, and when the silence in his truck cabin felt heavier than any thunder outside. He preferred the quicker route home from his small woodworking shop on most nights, but today had been long, and something in him had resisted going the usual way, something unspoken, quiet, like a whisper from the universe guiding him down that winding, lonely road flanked by empty fields and old power poles. The wipers struggled against the downpour, flicking side to side with the rhythm of a tired heart, and Luna, his 5-year-old daughter, had already fallen asleep in her car seat behind him, hugging her worn-out bunny plush, her lips slightly parted in soft dreams. He glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, and for a moment his chest ached, not from regret, but from the ever-present ache of trying to be enough for her, to be father and mother, to be love and discipline, warmth and guidance all at once. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, jaw clenched in quiet determination. But then his eyes caught something, or rather, someone, on the side of the road, standing just beneath the flickering beam of a broken street lamp. Her figure hunched, drenched from head to toe, as though the heavens had poured every sorrow upon her shoulders, and she hadn't the strength left to run. He slowed instinctively, unsure why his breath caught in his throat, unsure why this stranger struck him so deeply in the gut, as if some forgotten part of him had recognized a reflection in her before his mind had time to argue. She wasn't just wet. She was trembling, arms clutched around her soaked backpack like it was her last possession, her last anchor to the world. Her feet were bare, bare against the cold, wet concrete, and her skin gleamed dark and rich under the occasional flash of lightning. Her long braided hair matted down and heavy from the rain, strands sticking to her cheeks as if the storm itself had wrapped her in mourning. Cole brought the truck to a gentle stop, blinking the water from his windshield, heart thudding in confusion, and, for a moment, he debated. Should he help? The world wasn't safe, not anymore, and men like him didn't just stop for mysterious women in the rain. But then she turned, slowly, like someone afraid of what waited behind her, and their eyes locked, hers wide, shimmering with sadness, defiance, and something else. Something broken, as if she were both terrified of being seen and aching for someone to truly see her. Before he could stop himself, he lowered the window just enough for his voice to cut through the sound of the rain. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice steady but cautious, and she flinched at the sound like she hadn't heard. Another human speak to her in days. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He saw the way her fingers tightened around the bag, the way her chest rose and fell with shallow, panicked breaths. And then, after a long, stretching pause, she nodded once, slowly. "I'm not trying to scare you," Cole continued gently, sensing her fear. You shouldn't be out here, not like this. Do you need a ride somewhere?" Her eyes drifted past him toward the sleeping child in the back, and something shifted in her expression. Caution gave way to an almost wistful longing, or maybe it was exhaustion too deep for words. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, the rain pouring in rivulets down her arms and legs, and finally, with trembling hands, she opened the passenger door and slid inside, her body moving like she might break if she moved too fast. She didn't speak at first. The only sound was the hiss of the rain on the truck's roof and the gentle snore of Luna behind them. Cole handed her a towel from under the seat without a word, and she took it with a soft nod, her eyes never quite meeting his. She began patting her arms and face, and when she finally looked up, Cole noticed the deep brown in her eyes, eyes that carried whole volumes of stories never told. "Name's Cole," he offered, keeping his hands on the wheel. "And that's Luna in the back. She's my daughter." The woman gave a tiny smile, one so faint it almost didn't exist. "Nya," she whispered, voice hoarse and small. "Thank you." It was the way she said it that caught him, not with casual gratitude, but as if no one had said her name kindly in a long, long time. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He just drove, guided by instinct, by the invisible thread that now connected them. The journey back to his cabin felt suspended in time. Cole's house sat just at the edge of town, hidden behind tall trees and a gravel path that rattled under the weight of his old truck. The house wasn't large, but it was warm and full of soul. Wood-paneled walls, soft lighting, hand-built furniture, and photos of Luna and her late mother, whose smile still lingered in every frame. As he pulled into the driveway, Naya shifted, clutching her backpack tighter, and Cole could feel her anxiety pulsing like static in the cab. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly, turning the engine off. "But you can come in. Get warm. Get dry. It's not safe out there tonight." She hesitated for a full 5 seconds, then nodded again, and that simple nod felt like a trust she hadn't given anyone in years. He unbuckled Luna carefully, holding her against his chest as she stirred slightly in sleep, and Nia followed silently behind, her footsteps soft against the wet gravel, her presence barely a whisper in the storm. Inside, Nia stood near the doorway like she didn't belong, eyes darting to corners and exits, body tense and alert, like a soldier, returned from battle. Cole handed her a dry towel and offered one of his ex-wife's old sweatshirts folded in a nearby drawer. Something soft, oversized, worn with comfort. Naya accepted it without speaking and stepped into the bathroom to change. Cole made cocoa while she was gone, lighting the fireplace and setting a second mug down on the coffee table beside hers. When she returned, she looked different, not just dry, but softer, the sweatshirt hanging loosely around her frame, sleeves swallowed over her hands. Her eyes were still tired, still guarded, but something had shifted. Luna, now awake but still sleepy, wandered in, rubbing her eyes, and blinked up at Nia with curious awe. "Daddy, is she an angel?" Luna asked softly, her voice carrying a kind of innocence that made Nia blink rapidly, as if trying to trap tears before they fell. Cole chuckled gently, rubbing Luna's back. "She might be," he said, looking over at Nia with a gaze that held more questions than he dared ask aloud. Nia sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, clutching the warm mug between her fingers, and stared into the flames. "I can leave in the morning," she murmured, but her voice didn't carry certainty. It carried fear. Cole didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat down across from her and simply said, "You're safe here. Stay as long as you need." And in that moment, though no promises were made and no pasts revealed, something profound settled between them, like two broken souls recognizing each other in the dark. The rain continued to fall outside, soft now, rhythmic, like a lullaby. And as Luna climbed up beside Naya, resting her head on her arm without hesitation, Naya closed her eyes just for a moment and breathed, not out of relief, not yet, but out of the faintest whisper of hope. Because that night wasn't just a passing storm. It was the beginning of a story fate had been waiting to write, and neither of them knew it yet. The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle by morning, tapping lightly on the windows as dawn broke slowly across the small clearing that held Cole's cabin, and inside the warm living room, the fire had dimmed to embers while the air grew still, holding on to the scent of cocoa, the distant comfort of sleep, and the unspoken tension of two lives not yet ready to be unpacked. Nia sat silently by the window, wrapped in the same oversized sweatshirt Cole had offered the night before, her bare feet tucked beneath her, her gaze fixed on the outside world as if it whispered things only she could hear. Answers, maybe, or memories too sharp to speak aloud. The warmth of the room did little to thaw the ice that clung to her thoughts, and though her body was dry and safe now, her soul was still soaked with everything she'd carried into that truck the night before. She hadn't slept, not really. She'd closed her eyes only for moments at a time, haunted by flashes behind her eyelids, faces, sirens, shadows she couldn't outrun, and every time she tried to rest, her body jerked awake with the memory of what she'd left behind. Cole noticed from the kitchen, where he quietly moved through morning rituals with the care of a man who had raised a child through grief. He didn't intrude. He just brewed the coffee, cracked eggs into the skillet, and kept glancing toward the figure by the window, as if trying to read a book written in a language his heart half understood. Luna had already bounded into the room, full of sleepy energy, wearing her fuzzy purple pajamas and dragging her bunny plush along by the ear. She walked up to Nia with zero hesitation, her innocence not bothered by adult worries, and simply plopped onto the rug in front of her with a tiny grin. "Do you like cartoons?" she asked with complete sincerity. Nya blinked, startled out of her trance, and managed the faintest smile, the corners of her mouth tugging up like petals, blooming in slow motion. "Sometimes," she answered, voice still quiet, but softer than the night before. Luna beamed like she'd won something. "Daddy says cartoons help your heart feel better." Then she turned on the TV and began narrating every scene with the kind of enthusiasm that only a child untouched by sorrow could bring. Nia didn't respond much, but her smile lingered longer now, and Cole caught a glimpse of it when he brought over two steaming mugs, coffee for himself, tea for her. She took the cup gently, murmuring another thank you, and wrapped her hands around it like she needed the heat to anchor her. Cole sat across from her but didn't press, didn't ask questions she clearly wasn't ready to answer. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was careful, like the space between two strangers who had walked through fire and didn't want to spread the flames. After a long pause, Nya finally spoke. "I was a nurse." Her voice trembled slightly, as if admitting even that was too close to something buried. Cole raised his eyes to meet hers, nodding gently, offering the safety of quiet understanding. She didn't elaborate, but he caught the hesitation in her phrasing, the way "was" hung in the air like a ghost. That single word said more than a story could. She wasn't anymore. Something had ended. Something had changed. Luna's laughter broke through the heaviness again, and Naya glanced at her with that same subtle wonder, watching the little girl roll on the carpet, giggling at a cartoon giraffe. "She's special," Naya whispered, almost to herself. Cole smiled, his expression soft. "She saved me," he said, the weight of truth resting gently behind his words. Naya looked back at him, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Maybe it was recognition, maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the fear of growing attached to something that could be taken away. She didn't respond to that, but her hands trembled slightly as she took another sip of tea. Cole saw it, the tremor, the way she flinched when the kettle hissed earlier, the way her eyes darted to the door every few minutes, scanning, not out of curiosity, but habit. This wasn't just a woman who had lost something. This was someone who had been hunted by her past. Still, he didn't ask. Instead, he got up, made grilled cheese sandwiches, his go-to comfort meal, and set a plate near her without a word. Nya blinked at it like she wasn't sure how to accept such a simple act of kindness. But she took a bite. She ate slowly, like each chew reminded her she was still human, still alive, still capable of ordinary things. Cole sat back down and watched the way Luna kept glancing between them, smiling each time Naya reacted to her cartoon commentary. "Can she stay, Daddy?" Luna asked suddenly, looking up at Cole with eyes that mirrored her mother's, wide, round, full of stubborn hope. Cole glanced at Naya, who froze, startled by the question. He didn't answer right away. He knelt beside Luna and said, "She can stay. Tonight." Naya didn't protest, but her fingers tightened again around her mug. One night. That's all it was supposed to be. That evening, as Luna played with crayons at the coffee table, Cole offered Nia a blanket and showed her to the small guest room. It wasn't much, just a bed, a lamp, and a window that overlooked the woods. But it was warm, clean, and quiet. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "Thank you," she whispered again, and Cole nodded, pausing before closing the door softly behind her. Hours passed. The house fell into its usual nighttime rhythm. Luna bathed and tucked in, her nightlight glowing softly. Cole sat in the kitchen, drinking tea he didn't really want, his thoughts drifting more than he liked. Something about Naya stayed with him. Not just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but the way she carried something so heavy without breaking. The way her silence seemed louder than most people's shouting. He didn't know her story, and he didn't need to. Not yet. But he knew she was running. Not on foot. Not anymore. But in her eyes there was a flight still happening. Her eyes were running, not her feet. In the quiet of the guest room, Nie sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers running over the edge of the blanket like she was reminding herself it was real. She hadn't slept in a real bed in weeks, maybe longer. She set her backpack gently on the floor, unzipped it, and pulled out only one thing. A small leather journal wrapped with a worn ribbon. She opened it slowly, not to write, but to look at the photograph tucked inside the front cover. Her fingers brushed the edge of the picture, her breath catching as tears welled in her eyes. It was a photo of a man, tall, smiling, wearing scrubs like her own. And beneath the photo, tattooed across her wrist, was a name, Evan. Her thumb traced the ink gently as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She didn't make a sound. She couldn't. It was like crying had become something she did without permission, without noise, like grief had rewired her. She curled up on the bed, blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling through watery eyes. Luna's voice echoed faintly from the other room, a dream mumble that made Nia smile through her tears. She couldn't stay. She knew that. She wasn't safe, and the longer she stayed, the more she would be seen. But something about the way that little girl smiled, something about the warmth in Cole's voice, the lack of pressure, the absence of judgment, made it harder to leave than she expected. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. For the first time in weeks, it came without nightmares. And in the room next door, Cole lay awake, staring at the ceiling as well. He didn't know what Naya was hiding, but he knew what fear looked like. And whatever storm she had walked out of, it had left her soaked to the soul. But it also left something behind in its wake. Something delicate, something barely beginning. A seed of trust. And though he told himself it was just for one night, deep down, he felt it too. That maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had been found. The following morning began without warning, just like most mornings in the quiet cabin, nestled between pine and maple trees, where sun rays were filtered through thick branches, and birds dared to sing softly over the fading hum of last night's rain. Nia had awoken before Cole or Luna, not from nightmares this time, but from something else. A restfulness unfamiliar, like her body had finally let go for just a few hours. She stepped out of the guest room barefoot, still in the sweatshirt he had lent her. The sleeves tugged over her hands as if still unsure she deserved comfort. The cabin was peaceful, the kettle sitting untouched, the sink clean, a small chalkboard on the kitchen wall with the words, "Today we breathe," scribbled on it in a child's handwriting. She smiled faintly at the message, her fingers brushing the rim of a mug on the counter before quietly setting to work. There was something soothing about the silence, something gentle in the way the house carried the scent of cinnamon and pine wood, something that allowed her to move without fear, to exist without looking over her shoulder. She opened the fridge and found eggs, some butter and milk. There was bread, too, a little dry around the edges, but perfect for French toast. She didn't think. She didn't pause. She just started preparing it. Whisking eggs in a blue ceramic bowl she assumed Cole had made himself. It was slightly uneven at the rim, but full of charm. She dipped the bread and placed it gently on the pan, the sizzle filling the air with promise. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply needed to feel useful, needed to remember who she was before she had become a shadow. The toast browned just right, and she plated it carefully before realizing Luna was standing behind her, tiny fingers clutching her bunny as she rubbed sleep from her eyes, her head tilting in sleepy awe. "It smells like angels," Luna whispered with a drowsy smile, and Naya turned, stunned for a moment, then burst into a soft laugh, a sound so rare it startled even herself. "Well, you must be hungry," Naya replied gently, and Luna nodded before climbing onto a stool at the kitchen counter. Cole emerged moments later, still adjusting his shirt, blinking at the surprising sight of breakfast already plated, the kitchen warm, his daughter humming a happy tune while munching on toast. He paused in the doorway, watching as Naya gently tucked a napkin into Luna's collar, brushing her curls aside with the tender care of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, even if she hadn't. "Morning," he said quietly, not wanting to startle them. Nia looked up, a little unsure, her posture instantly a little more guarded, but Cole gave her a nod, appreciative, not invasive. "French toast smells like home," he added, and she offered a shy smile before sitting down across from Luna, accepting a piece for herself at the girl's insistence. They ate together in the softest kind of harmony, a fragile peace forming not with grand gestures, but in the sharing of morning light and buttered bread. Later that day, after Cole had gone out back to check on a fence panel that had come loose in the storm, Naya found herself folding laundry she hadn't been asked to touch. It wasn't just busy work, it was grounding. Luna sat beside her, holding socks and mismatching them on purpose, laughing each time Naya raised an eyebrow. "This one is Daddy's, but I think it looks better on your foot," Luna said, placing a large sock on Naya's knee, giggling. Naya chuckled and shook her head, the simple domesticity stitching something back together in her chest, thread by invisible thread. Luna didn't treat her like a stranger. She treated her like someone who belonged, and that was terrifying and beautiful in the same breath. As they continued folding, Luna turned suddenly and asked, "Did you ever braid a unicorn's hair?" Naya blinked, surprised, then laughed again. "No, but I've braided a lot of hair," she said playfully. "Would you like me to braid yours?" Luna's face lit up like the first day of spring, and within moments Naya found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor, gently separating strands of Luna's curls while the little girl told stories about dream castles, glowing forests, and tea parties with talking frogs. Cole walked in quietly during one of those tales, pausing just long enough to watch Naya's fingers move with expert care, her expression tender and attentive, her body relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. Luna leaned into her without fear, as if Nia had always been there, part of the fabric of their life. Something inside Cole shifted, something subtle but sure. It wasn't just gratitude he felt, it was something warmer, something unfamiliar in the shape of desire and comfort. He stepped back out, not wanting to interrupt, but the image remained with him for the rest of the day. The picture of a woman who had walked in from a storm and somehow begun to mend their world without trying to fix it. That night, after dinner, Nia read a bedtime story to Luna while Cole cleaned up the kitchen. Her voice was gentle, full of rise and fall, weaving magic into the words as she read from a book about stars that could speak. Luna listened with her chin propped on her hands, eyes wide with wonder, and by the time the story ended, her breaths had slowed, eyelids fluttering closed, as sleep pulled her under. Nia closed the book slowly, kissing the little girl's forehead with a care so natural it ached. She turned to leave, only to find Cole standing at the door, watching again, his arms crossed loosely, his face unreadable but soft around the eyes. "She hasn't fallen asleep that fast in months," he murmured. "Whatever magic you have, she trusts it." Nia blushed slightly, lowering her gaze. "Kids are honest with who they trust," she said quietly. "They don't pretend." It was later, as they sat in the living room with mugs of warm tea between them and the fire casting soft glows across the walls, that Luna's earlier words echoed unexpectedly. She had called Nia something that struck her soul like lightning. Angel Nia. The moment she'd heard it, her breath had caught, and now, sitting in the calm after bedtime, Nia finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. That name wasn't just sweet. It was history. It was grief. Once, long ago, someone else had called her Angel, someone who held her late at night after ER shifts, someone who told her she made even broken people feel whole. Nia's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her hand unconsciously touching her collarbone, where the pendant used to lie. Lost now, maybe forever. "Angel," she whispered to herself, then shook her head gently, trying to stay present, trying not to let the past pull her under again. Cole didn't speak, but he watched her carefully, noticed how her fingers curled into the blanket, how her jaw tensed before she sipped her tea. He didn't ask, he just let her sit in it. And that silence, respectful, undemanding, was exactly what she needed. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the single dad who had taken her in, but the man who moved with quiet strength, who carried his pain with dignity, who made space for others even when his own heart still bore scars. There was a gentleness in Cole that drew her in slowly, like a tide pulling her toward something safe. And in that moment, something wordless passed between them, a kind of understanding only shared by those who have lost and dared to open their hearts again. Later that night, when she returned to her room, Nie sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, her mind full of Luna's laughter and Cole's steady presence. She picked up her journal again, but didn't open it. Instead, she whispered a silent thank you to whatever force had led her to that street lamp, to that truck, to that home. She wasn't ready to call it anything yet, certainly not sanctuary, but it was something. A flicker, a warmth, a beginning. And she knew deep in her bones that the little girl who had named her Angel had unknowingly pulled her back from a ledge she didn't even know she'd been standing on. For the first time in so long, Nia let herself cry. Not from fear, not from grief, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being seen and maybe even needed. The house was quiet, the night full, and outside the rain had finally stopped. But something else had started. Something fragile, yes, but real. She didn't know how long she would stay, and she still didn't know if she could allow herself to want more, but she knew this much. She was no longer running with her feet. She was still scared, still stitched together in places, but something in Luna's eyes had rooted her in the present, and something in Cole's silence had made her feel less alone in the dark. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, looked out the window at the clearing beyond the trees, and whispered a name, not the one she had lost, but the one Luna had given her. Angel Nia, a name not bound by grief, but maybe born from healing. And in that moment, with nothing grand and nothing loud, she knew this wasn't just shelter. It was the beginning of something holy. The morning sun filtered softly through the kitchen window, slicing golden beams across the wooden floor and casting long, lazy shadows over the polished counter where the fruit basket sat half full and a chipped mug waited beside the kettle. Nya had woken earlier than usual, stirred not by anxiety but by something lighter, a sense of calm that had slowly begun to bloom over the last few days, quiet and unannounced, like the first hints of spring after an endless winter. She moved barefoot through the kitchen, hair tied loosely in a side braid, her oversized sleeves pushed up as she sliced strawberries into a ceramic bowl Luna had once painted with crooked rainbows. The house was still mostly silent, the kind of hush that came not from loneliness but from contentment, and she allowed herself, for once, to move without tension in her shoulders, to hum a little tune under her breath that felt oddly familiar to her lips. Luna padded in moments later, yawning wide with Bunny in tow, her curls wild from sleep and eyes still sticky with dreams. "I smell strawberries," she whispered dramatically, climbing onto a stool like a queen reclaiming her throne. Naya laughed, that soft bell-like laugh that was becoming more frequent now, and handed her a spoon. "Then I must be doing something right," she teased, brushing a curl from Luna's forehead. The radio on the counter crackled faintly before landing on an old song, a bluesy, soulful melody that spilled into the kitchen like sunlight itself. Without thinking, Naya swayed a little, hips shifting gently with the rhythm. Luna giggled and jumped down. "Dance with me," she demanded, her hands tugging Naya's fingers. And so, in the middle of the morning light and strawberry-scented air, Naya scooped Luna into her arms, twirling gently in circles, both of them laughing freely, their joy bouncing off the walls and ceiling, as if trying to fill the cracks left behind by time. It was in that exact moment that Cole entered the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck, expecting the usual quiet hum of routine, only to freeze in the doorway when he saw them. The sight pulled him still. Nia barefoot, spinning with Luna in her arms, both of them laughing with their heads thrown back, her braids swinging behind her like a ribbon of joy. He didn't speak, afraid even a breath would shatter the beauty of it. The song swelled, and Nia dipped Luna dramatically, both of them laughing harder, until finally Nia turned slightly and saw him standing there. Her eyes widened, cheeks flushing with sudden color, and she stopped moving, holding Luna more protectively now, as if caught in something she hadn't meant to show. "I didn't hear you come in," she said quickly, setting Luna down gently. "We were just—" Cole smiled, eyes still drinking in the moment. "You're good at this," he said, voice low, filled with something deeper than compliment. She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's easy when your heart feels safe." The word hung there like the aroma of something freshly baked, warm and lingering, hard to ignore. Safe. It wasn't a word either of them threw around lightly. Cole felt it settle into his chest like a truth he hadn't dared speak aloud. The way Naya looked just then, still catching her breath, lips parted, eyes bright and uncertain, it etched something permanent into his memory. Luna didn't notice the shift in atmosphere. She had returned to her bowl of strawberries and was humming along to the radio, now playing a slower tune, oblivious to the emotional tectonics unfolding in the adult's silence. The rest of the day moved in a blur of small gestures and loaded glances. Naya cleaned the windows in the living room, humming softly. Cole sanded down a splintered chair on the porch, eyes occasionally drifting toward the open front door, where Nya's voice filtered through. They passed one another in the hallway, brushing shoulders, sharing small smiles, sharing more in what they didn't say than what they did. When evening arrived, casting golden-orange light across the trees and bathing the house in warmth, dinner was quieter than usual, but not cold. Luna chattered happily about wanting a garden full of blueberry bushes. Naya smiled and nodded along, and Cole kept stealing glances across the table, catching the way Naya's eyelashes fluttered when she laughed, or how she tilted her head slightly when Luna spoke, always giving her full attention like it was sacred. After dinner, as Luna played with her toys in the living room, Cole and Nie moved into the kitchen to clean up. There was no formal agreement. No one had asked the other for help, but they moved in tandem now, Nie rinsing, Cole drying, the rhythm of it oddly intimate, the closeness undeniable. The light above the sink flickered a little, casting soft shadows on their faces as they worked side by side. "She loves having you here," Cole said after a while, breaking the silence with a truth too heavy to hold back. Nia's hands paused beneath the water. "She's easy to love," she murmured. "She reminds me what soft feels like." Cole nodded, the edge of the dish towel clenched in his hand. "You remind me what full feels like," he said without thinking, and immediately regretted the weight of his own words. Nya turned to look at him, eyes wide, not with fear, but with something else entirely, something hesitant and hopeful. Their hands met accidentally as she passed him a bowl. Her fingers grazed his, warm, wet from the sink, and he froze. So did she. Neither of them moved. Time slowed to something almost unbearable. Their eyes locked in the muted light, breaths shallow. Cole leaned in, almost imperceptibly, pulled by something magnetic and terrifying. Naya didn't pull away. Her eyes searched his, and for a second he saw it. Permission, curiosity, that fragile, flickering flame. But just as his face neared hers, just as the scent of cinnamon and lavender wrapped around them, he blinked, pulled back, and turned away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice almost inaudible. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," Naya replied softly, her voice steadier than his. I'm still learning how to be near someone and not be scared." Cole nodded, biting the inside of his cheek. "And I'm still learning how to want something without rushing to take it." A pause fell between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was honest, real, like two people trying to walk through a fog without stepping on each other's shadows. That night, as Luna slept soundly and the kitchen light was turned off, Nia returned to her room, heart still fluttering from the touch of his hand. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. She didn't look broken anymore. Not entirely. There were still cracks, yes, but they were being filled with laughter, with small joys, with the way Luna said her name like it belonged to something beautiful. And now, with the way Cole had looked at her in that kitchen, like she was not a ghost, not a burden, but someone who mattered. Something inside her shifted. It was the first time in forever she didn't feel like she had to leave to stay safe. Cole sat on the edge of the porch, watching stars emerge in the purple sky, his hands still tingling from the warmth of her touch. He didn't know where this was heading. He wasn't rushing it. But he knew this. Love wasn't a storm. It didn't arrive loud and wild. Sometimes it crept into kitchens, stirred beneath the scent of garlic and dish soap, whispered itself into the space between two people washing plates. And maybe, just maybe, that kitchen had become more than a place to cook. It had become sacred ground, where love began not with confessions, but with hands that trembled against each other and hearts that dared to stay. The house had long since slipped into silence, but Naya remained awake, her heart refusing to follow the stillness of the night. The warmth of the kitchen earlier that evening still clung faintly to her skin. The way Cole had looked at her, the way his hand had lingered against hers. But now, in the solitude of the guest room, the memory only brought more unrest. She lay on top of the blanket at first, eyes open in the dark, then rolled to her side, then her back, until finally, with a breath too heavy for her lungs, she got up. Her feet touched the wooden floor quietly, and she moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. The stars were out, scattered across the deep sky like secrets she hadn't told anyone. The trees swayed gently, their branches whispering things no one else could hear, and the wind moved like a song she once knew. But none of it comforted her. The past was awake too, and tonight it wouldn't let go. She stood there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, not because she was cold, but because her body remembered things her mind tried to forget. The beep of hospital monitors, the flash of red and blue lights, the muffled screaming behind closed doors, the sterile scent of antiseptic on her skin, and blood that never seemed to wash away no matter how many times she scrubbed her hands. These weren't memories that visited politely. They barged in, loud and merciless, pulling her out of the present and back into the chaos. She squeezed her eyes shut. But then came the clearest image of all, the one that always brought her to her knees. Evan lying on that hospital bed, pale, still, lips already turning blue, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing. Her hands on his chest, pressing, begging, the sound of his ribs cracking beneath the pressure of CPR. The nurse behind her whispering, "He's gone." But she kept pushing, kept breathing into him, her tears mixing with the blood on his cheek. Evan hadn't just been a patient. He'd been her everything, her future, her anchor, her softness in a world full of suffering. And he died not from illness or accident, but from violence. He was murdered by the brother of a man Nia had helped put away with her testimony in court. Another nurse assaulted, and Nia had been the only one brave enough to speak up. She thought it would bring justice. She thought she'd done the right thing. Instead, it brought vengeance. A message sent through Evan's death. A promise that she'd be next. So she ran. She left everything. The hospital, the city, the home they'd planned together. She changed her number, dyed her hair, burned the last of the photos they took on the rooftop garden where he proposed. And even now, standing in a cabin miles away from everything familiar, she still felt him, gone and yet always there. Her tears came slow at first, then steady, streaking down her cheeks silently. She didn't sob, she didn't scream. She cried like someone who had cried 1,000 times before, soft, resigned, as if her body had memorized the script. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear Cole's footsteps. But suddenly, he was there, standing a few feet behind her in the low light of the hallway. He didn't say her name. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just stepped into the room slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not okay, are you?" She turned, startled at first, but when she saw it was him, she didn't back away. She didn't pretend. She just shook her head, eyes swollen, face wet. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." He didn't reach for her. He just sat down in the armchair by the window, waiting. Not as an interrogator, not as someone demanding answers, but as someone who knew what it was to grieve in pieces. She walked over slowly, unsure, and sat down on the edge of the bed, twisting her hands together in her lap. It took her a long time to speak again, but when she did, her voice was low and raw. "I lost him," she said. "I was supposed to save him, and I couldn't." Cole didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "I was a nurse, ER, long hours, always full of adrenaline. But he was my calm. He made the job worth it." She stopped, swallowing hard. "He was murdered because I tried to do the right thing." Her voice cracked, and for a moment she couldn't continue. Cole leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on her, not with pity, but with presence. She continued. I testified in a case. Another nurse was assaulted by the son of some rich man. No one wanted to get involved, but I couldn't stay silent. I thought it would be over once justice was done. But it wasn't. Evan died, and I knew they were sending a message. Cole's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected that. The weight of what she carried, the danger she had lived under, the reason behind her fear. It all became clear. She looked at him now, trembling, shoulders hunched like she expected judgment. I quit. Disappeared. I've been running ever since. And every time I think I've found somewhere quiet, I hear something, see someone, and I start packing again. Her fingers twisted around the hem of her sleeve. I didn't mean to stay this long. I didn't plan to get close to her, to you. I didn't mean for any of this. Cole stood then, slowly, like the air between them had shifted. He walked toward her and knelt in front of the bed, looking up at her, his eyes steady. You didn't mean to survive either, but you did. His hand rested on the blanket, not touching her, but close enough. You've been carrying all of this alone for so long. You don't have to anymore. Nia looked down at him, tears returning. I've heard that before, she whispered. You're not alone. People say it like it's easy, but then they leave, or they die. Cole shook his head slowly. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying I want to be the one who stays. Her breath hitched. Why? He didn't hesitate. Because when I see you with Luna, I remember what joy looks like. Because when I hear you laugh, I remember how silence used to hurt. Because when you look at me, I don't feel like a man who lost everything. I feel like someone who still has something to give. His voice faltered just slightly. Because I want to believe again. And I think we can do that together. Before she could reply, a soft sound pulled their attention, the creak of a door, the shuffle of small feet. Luna stood in the doorway, bunny in one arm, her eyes blinking sleepily. She looked at them both and walked straight toward Nia. Without a word, she wrapped her small arms around Nia's legs, resting her cheek against her knees. Don't be sad, Angel Nia, she murmured, half asleep. We're here now. And in that moment, Nia broke, not in a way that shattered her, but in a way that opened her. The dam she'd built to survive finally let go. She leaned down, pulled Luna into her arms, and held her tight, sobbing into the little girl's shoulder, as Luna patted her back like a tiny guardian angel. Cole stepped back quietly, giving them space, but his hand reached for Nia's shoulder briefly, grounding her. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just nodded, her face buried in Luna's curls. Maybe, she thought, just maybe. This was the beginning of home. Not a place, but a feeling. Not safety promised with words, but safety shown in small acts, in the steadiness of a man who stayed, in the arms of a child who believed in angels, and in the night that didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. The night after Nia had broken down in his arms, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but in subtle, gentle ways that could only be felt rather than seen. The kind of shift that happens when two people stop holding their breath around each other. That morning, Cole made the coffee without realizing he'd added an extra scoop, just the way Nia liked it. She smiled when she noticed, but didn't say anything. He caught her humming in the hallway again as she folded laundry, her voice unguarded, flowing like warm water over stone. The silence between them, once heavy with caution, had become tender, comforting, like the pause between heartbeats where something new takes root. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about breathing differently now, softer, freer, together. Cole hadn't noticed how much lighter he'd become until his older brother, Aaron, dropped by that afternoon. Aaron stepped onto the porch with 2 takeout bags and a crooked grin, tossing one to Cole like they were 20 again. "You look different," Aaron said after a while, leaning against the wooden rail, glancing toward the house where Nia and Luna's laughter echoed faintly from inside. "What kind of different?" Cole asked, raising an eyebrow. Aaron shrugged, but his smirk deepened. "Lighter. Less like the world sitting on your chest. You smile again." Cole didn't respond immediately. He looked down into his coffee, watching the swirl of cream settle, his chest tightening at the truth of those words. He hadn't realized it either. That slow transformation, from numb to tender, had crept in quietly, like Naya herself had. And now it was undeniable. He smiled again, not just out of politeness, but because joy had begun to seep into his life in unexpected moments. Watching Naya braid Luna's hair, hearing her laugh at Luna's knock-knock jokes, seeing her fall asleep on the couch with a book halfway open across her chest. He found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't been ready for, memorizing how she took her tea with too much honey, how she always wore socks to bed even if it was warm, how she unconsciously touched her collarbone when she was deep in thought. He began to notice the way his chest would ache, not painfully but longingly, when she walked past him, the scent of her still lingering in the air. Her presence had softened his grief, not by replacing it, but by giving it space to breathe. Where once the house was filled with silent ghosts and unanswered echoes, now there were footsteps, songs, and bedtime stories. There was life, there was movement, there was warmth again. And yet Cole didn't dare assume. He still approached her carefully, afraid that one wrong word would send her running again. But sometimes things happened beyond words, like the quiet evening when they were clearing dishes after dinner, and Naya accidentally brushed his hand while handing him a plate. He didn't pull back. Neither did she. Their fingers touched a second longer than necessary, and she looked at him then, eyes soft but searching. It was a fleeting moment, but it anchored something inside him, a yearning that went beyond attraction. He began craving her voice in the mornings, her presence in the room even if she wasn't speaking. He wanted to ask her about her dreams, about the books she used to love, about the life she might dare to build again if she wasn't always looking over her shoulder. It was another evening, crisp and golden, when the words she said caught him off guard. They were getting Luna ready for bed, pajamas on, teeth brushed, the usual bedtime chaos. Nia sat on the edge of the bed, reading a story while Cole folded the blanket at the foot. Luna was already drifting off, clutching her bunny, when Nia gently closed the book and looked over at him. "You're doing a beautiful job with her," she said, her voice steady but low. Cole froze. That simple sentence, so full of truth and grace, knocked the wind out of him. No one had said that since Jenna, his wife, died. Not friends, not family, not even himself. He had doubted every decision, every tear he'd wiped from Luna's cheek, every time he failed to answer her questions about heaven. But now, hearing those words from Naya, someone who had seen the mess and the healing up close, it shattered something inside him. He turned slowly, unable to speak for a moment, his throat tight. "Thank you," he managed, his voice husky with emotion. Nia stood quietly, folding her arms as if unsure if she had said too much. But Cole stepped closer, compelled by something greater than hesitation. The room was dim, lit only by Luna's nightlight, casting a soft glow around them. Nia looked up at him, her face inches from his, and in that breathless pause, everything else fell away. There was no storm, no past, no fear, just 2 people standing in the middle of something new, something gentle but powerful. He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she didn't. Her eyes held his, calm and open, and then, in the quietest moment of the night, he kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't impulsive. It was slow, meaningful, the kind of kiss that carried grief and hope in equal measure. Her lips trembled slightly against his, but she didn't pull back. She leaned into it, into him, her hands finding his shirt like a lifeline. The kiss deepened, not just in feeling, but in purpose. It wasn't about possession or desire alone. It was about healing, about returning, about learning to breathe again. Cole's hand gently cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with reverence, and Naya melted into him as if she'd been waiting her whole life for a moment that didn't demand anything more than truth. When they parted, their foreheads touched, eyes closed, breath mingling. Cole whispered, "I've wanted to do that for so long." Nia opened her eyes slowly. "I know," she said softly. "So have I." They stood like that for a while, hands still lightly holding each other, the weight of years softening beneath the newfound connection. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about acknowledging it and daring to move anyway. Nia exhaled, finally able to let go of the invisible line she had drawn between them. Cole smiled, not because he had won something, but because he felt whole again, not as a man who had lost, but as a man beginning to find. That night, as the house settled once more into silence, the air between them was no longer filled with hesitation. Something had shifted, tenderly but firmly. They didn't speak more of the kiss. They didn't make promises. But Cole lingered a little longer outside Naya's door, his fingers brushing the frame, his heart beating not just for himself, but for her. And inside, Naya stood with her back to the door, one hand pressed to her lips, her eyes glistening not with fear this time, but with something braver. Hope. The morning after their first kiss, Naya stood in the kitchen alone, staring out the window with a warm cup in her hands, but the tea had gone cold. The softness from the night before still clung to her skin, the memory of Cole's lips, the way he had held her as if she was fragile and strong all at once. She'd slept only a few hours, not from restlessness, but from the overwhelming unfamiliarity of feeling safe. For the first time in years, she hadn't woken to the sound of her own heartbeat racing or the imagined echo of sirens in her ears. The house was still, humming with the life she'd come to know and love, the creaking of floorboards, the occasional tap from Luna's toy horse against the wooden hallway, the kettle whistling softly behind her. Naya breathed in and tried to believe this peace could last. But some part of her, the part forged from fear and history, knew that peace never lingered for long when secrets still breathed beneath the surface. The knock came just after breakfast, sharp and sudden, two firm raps at the door that made her heart stutter before her brain had time to react. Cole was in the backyard with Luna, helping her balance on an overturned bucket as she tried to reach the low-hanging plums from the tree. Ya moved to the door cautiously, wiping her hands on a towel that now felt damp from sweat. When she opened it, there was no one there, just the rustling of wind through the trees, the faint sound of Luna's laughter in the distance, and a single white envelope resting on the welcome mat. Her name was scrawled across the front in jagged black ink. Naya. Nothing else. No return address. No stamp. Just the name. And the handwriting. Her knees almost gave out. She bent down slowly, the edges of her vision blurring as her fingers touched the envelope. Her breath caught in her throat as recognition slammed into her chest like a punch. She knew this handwriting. She hadn't seen it in years, but she'd never forget it. The angles, the pressure of the pen, the signature slant at the end of each letter. It belonged to one person and one person only, Dorian Wells, the brother of the man she'd testified against, the one who stood in the hospital hallway the day Evan died, smiling like he'd won something, whispering words only she could hear. "You're next." Her hand trembled violently, the letter suddenly hot in her grip like it had teeth. Her instinct screamed to run, to disappear again, to pack a bag and slip out the back door before anyone could ask why. But then she looked through the window and saw Luna on Cole's shoulders, both of them laughing, carefree, whole, and she couldn't move. Cole saw her then, standing frozen in the doorway, pale and shaking. He handed Luna the plum she'd plucked, kissed the top of her head, and jogged over. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, immediately reading the panic in her face. "You okay?" She couldn't speak. Instead, she handed him the envelope, her hands no longer obeying her. He took it slowly, scanning the front, then looking back at her. "Naya," she nodded faintly. "I know who it's from." He opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper with typed words that chilled him as he read, "Did you really think you could hide forever? Justice always finds its way home. See you soon." There was no signature, no clue, just that threat, stark and unmistakable. Cole looked at her, his face shifting from confusion to protectiveness to something darker, understanding. He stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You need to tell me everything, please." She backed up slightly, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to bring this into your life," she whispered. "You and Luna. You've already lost so much. I didn't want to be another shadow in your home." His voice softened, though his jaw was still tense. "You're not a shadow. You're part of this house now. You're part of us. And I can't help you if I don't know what we're up against." She blinked, tears threatening to spill. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" He nodded. "Yes, all of it." So she sat him down at the kitchen table where their story had slowly begun to heal, and for the first time she didn't leave anything out. She told him everything about the trial, the threats, the way Evan had died because she did the right thing, how Dorian, the man behind the warnings, had been stalking her ever since, never outright attacking, but always sending a message, a glimpse, a word, a note, a shadow at the edge of her vision. She explained how she'd moved city to city, living like a ghost, always waiting for the past to claw its way back to her. She talked about the nights spent sleeping with a knife under her pillow, the mornings she'd wake up convinced she saw someone outside the window. Her voice cracked more than once, but Cole didn't interrupt. He just sat there, taking in every word, letting her unravel without judgment. When she finished, she braced herself, for the anger, for rejection, for the fear in his eyes that would say, "You brought danger into my daughter's life." But Cole didn't say any of those things. He reached across the table, took her hand in both of his, and asked softly, "What do you need from me?" The question stunned her more than the letter had. No one had ever asked that. Not her parents, who begged her to stop testifying. Not the detectives who took her statement. Not even Evan, whose love had been deep but always tinged with the helplessness of not knowing how to protect her. But Cole, he didn't ask what was wrong with her. He didn't demand why she hadn't told him sooner. He simply asked what she needed. And that single act of grace broke something open inside her. Her tears came fast now, pouring freely as she stood and fell into his arms. He caught her, held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "I'm so scared," she whispered against his chest. "I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you. Or her." He pulled back slightly, just enough to look her in the eye. "You're not going to. I'm here. We'll handle this together." She nodded, though her body still shook. It had been years since someone had stood beside her in the storm. She wasn't used to it. But in Cole's arms, for the first time, the storm didn't feel like it would drown her. That night, the house was quiet, but the tension lingered in the walls like a low hum. Cole double-checked the locks, then triple-checked them. He stood by Luna's bedroom door longer than usual, watching her sleep, the soft rise and fall of her chest, a reminder of what he had to protect. Naya sat in the living room, curled on the couch with a blanket around her eyes locked on the front door like it might open at any second. When Cole finally joined her, she looked up at him with a question in her eyes she couldn't bring herself to ask. "We'll figure this out," he said before she could speak. "I've got a friend who's a detective, quiet, smart, off-the-record kind of guy. He owes me. I'll reach out tomorrow." She nodded. "Thank you." He sat beside her, and they didn't speak for a while, just held hands under the blanket, letting the silence say what words couldn't, that whatever storm was coming, they were no longer facing it alone. Morning light filtered through the blinds like quiet permission, warm and golden, tracing gentle patterns across Naya's face as she lay in the quiet of the living room, still wrapped in the blanket from the night before. Her eyes were open but distant, and though sleep had touched her in fragments, it hadn't held her for long. Her mind was too loud. The letter, the past, the trembling fear that always seemed to walk beside her. It was all still there, but something had changed. Last night had been a turning point, not just because Cole had held her, but because she had finally let herself be held. That shift, tiny but seismic, settled inside her chest now like a fragile flicker of light. She sat up slowly, the world quiet around her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running. She didn't want to pack a bag or scan the windows or build another wall. She wanted to face it, to end the war she'd been silently fighting, and she wanted to do it with Cole beside her. When he walked in moments later, his hoodie sleeves pushed up, coffee in hand, hair still tousled from sleep, she looked at him not as a protector or a safe place, but as a partner, someone who had already chosen to stand in the storm without needing all the answers. "I want to go to the station," she said softly, her voice hoarse but sure. He stopped mid-step, turning to face her fully. "Today?" She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. "I want to reopen the file. I want to know what's real. I can't keep breathing like I'm waiting to drown." Cole crossed the room slowly, kneeling in front of her just like he had before, but this time there was something new in his eyes. Pride. "You don't have to do this alone." She smiled faintly, blinking back tears. "I know." By mid-morning, they were driving through town, Luna safely with Cole's sister for the day, the sky overcast but the road clear. Nya stared out the window, her fingers tapping softly against her thigh, nerves and resolve clashing in her chest. Cole's hand rested on the gear shift, close to hers but not touching, giving her space. "You sure you're okay?" he asked quietly. She turned to him. "Number, but I'm sure I need this." That was enough. When they pulled into the police station parking lot, Nya's stomach twisted, but her feet still moved. The building was nondescript, brick and glass, not the place where her nightmares had started, but still familiar enough to make her hands sweat. They walked in together, and Cole stayed just a step behind her, his presence steady like the rhythm of her breath. Inside, the station hummed with quiet activity. Officers moved in and out of back offices. A woman at the front desk looked up as they approached. "Can I help you?" Naya stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. "I need to reopen a file. My name is Naya Benton. It was filed under witness protection after a 2021 assault case involving Dorian Wells." The woman's brows lifted. "One moment, please." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then hung up and gestured toward the side door. "Detective Gray will see you." Detective Samuel Gray had once been the only officer Naya had trusted during the darkest chapter of her life. He wasn't warm, he wasn't chatty, but he was fair and he listened, which in those days had felt like salvation. When he stepped into the room now, older but still with that same calm, tired gaze, Naya's breath caught. He recognized her immediately. "Naya." "Detective Gray." He motioned to the seats across from him and nodded politely to Cole. "Let's talk." The room was small, beige, with a single flickering light above them and the low hum of computers nearby. But for Naya, it felt cavernous. She explained the letter, the years she'd been running, the fear that clung to her even when logic couldn't justify it anymore. And then she waited. Gray listened without interruption, then opened the file on his computer and began typing. "We've had Wells on the watch list since your testimony," he said, clicking through the database. "You were granted Level 2 anonymity. But," he paused, scrolling, "he was arrested 2 months ago, caught violating a restraining order in another case. He's in custody. Been there ever since." Nia blinked, stunned. "What?" Gray turned the screen toward her. "You've been running from a ghost, Naya. He's not out there anymore." The words hit her like a wave, cool, relentless, undeniable. She stared at the screen as if it would disappear. "All this time," she whispered, "I've been hiding from someone who wasn't even free." Gray softened his voice. "Your fear was real. But so is this. He's not a threat anymore." Her hands started to shake, not from terror now, but from the sheer release of it all. Years of fleeing, doubting, breaking down behind locked doors, only to find the monster had already been caged. Outside the station, the air felt different. The clouds had thinned, and sunlight cracked through in gentle shafts. Nya sat on the passenger side, hands gripping her thighs, the tremors in her body still catching her off guard. Cole didn't start the car. He turned toward her slowly, watching her fall apart, not from fear, but from the sudden weightlessness of it all. "I don't know how to live without fear," she whispered, voice crumbling. "I don't know how to exist without scanning exits or clutching my keys like weapons. I've built a life on survival. What happens when that's gone?" Cole didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her face gently, cupping her cheek with one hand, his thumb wiping the tear she didn't know had fallen. "Then let me teach you," he said softly. "Let me teach you how to live again. With joy, with trust, with love, not fear." Her eyes fluttered closed at his words, and her breath caught like she was learning how to inhale all over again. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. He smiled gently. "You don't have to be. Just be willing." And in that moment, she was. Back at the house, the world hadn't changed, but Naya had. She walked slower, breathed deeper, let her fingers trail across furniture and walls like she was mapping her way into belonging. She stopped flinching at every knock or footstep. She held Luna's hand tighter without fearing she'd have to let go. That night, after Luna had been tucked in and the lights were low, Naya stood in front of the small wooden box that held her old keepsakes. The name, tag from the hospital, the engagement ring she'd stopped wearing, the photos of Evan she hadn't looked at in years. She opened it slowly, her fingers moving across the items like farewells. Cole joined her silently, standing behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "You okay?" he whispered. "I think so," she answered, placing the ring back inside. "I think I'm ready to let it go. Not forget, just stop carrying it like a punishment." She closed the box and exhaled as if she'd released something sacred. "I buried my whole life in fear, but I think it's time I bury the fear instead." Cole kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "You're not alone in this." That night, for the first time in years, Nia fell asleep without checking the locks more than once. She didn't clutch the covers like a shield. She didn't cry into her pillow. She simply lay beside the man who had waited for her to come back to life and finally allowed herself to sleep without the pain hiding beneath her smile. And when the morning came, she woke not with dread, but with light in her chest. The morning sun painted soft golden stripes across the bedroom wall as Nia sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders, her bare feet brushing the wooden floor with a quietness that matched her thoughts. The house was still asleep. Luna curled safely in her room, and Cole already downstairs making coffee. But for once, silence wasn't threatening. It was gentle, familiar. She looked around the room, the place that had once been nothing more than a guest room, but now held her sweaters folded neatly in drawers, her favorite book on the nightstand, and the warmth of 1,000 quiet choices to stay. There were no locks on her suitcase anymore, no just-in-case packed bags by the door. Her toothbrush sat beside Cole's. Her shoes were in the hallway with Luna's muddy ones. She was here, she was home. But even as her world outside had settled, a storm still lingered in one corner of her heart. One that didn't come from fear of danger, but from the ache of unforgiven wounds. It wasn't Dorian Wells she needed to forgive. It wasn't the past she needed to rewrite. It was herself. And that was the hardest forgiveness of all. The guilt she'd carried had shaped her bones. Every decision since the night Evan died had been soaked in the belief that she had failed him. That if she hadn't testified, if she'd walked him out another door, if she hadn't paused by the vending machine, if. Guilt didn't just haunt you. It rewrote your memories, made you see your hands as stained even when they were clean. She had told Cole the truth, but she had never told herself. And now, even with the danger gone and love beginning to bloom, there was still a part of her that whispered, "You don't deserve this." She moved to the mirror, barefoot and quiet, her reflection looking back at her like a challenge. Her eyes were clearer now, less frantic, but there was still something buried beneath them. She leaned in, stared hard, and finally said aloud what she had never dared. "It wasn't your fault." Her voice was quiet, barely a sound, as though the words might crumble if they were spoken too loudly. But she didn't stop there. "You didn't kill him. You didn't choose fear, you chose survival. You didn't run because you were weak. You ran because your heart couldn't take one more bruise." Her throat tightened. She blinked back tears. "You're still worthy. You're still here." At that exact moment, Luna came bounding into the room in her mismatched socks and superhero pajama top, arms flung wide like she'd been launched by joy itself. She wrapped her tiny arms around Naya's waist from behind, resting her cheek against her back. "I love you," she whispered, as if she knew Naya's soul needed that sentence like oxygen. Naya froze, then placed her hands over Luna's and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She smiled. Because that whisper didn't just speak love, it cracked the final piece of armor she had wrapped around her guilt. And inside that moment, Naya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later that afternoon, something small but significant happened. Naya asked Cole to stay out of the kitchen. "I want to cook tonight," she said with a shy smile, and though it seemed simple, Cole understood the weight of that request. He had always been the one to cook, not just because he enjoyed it, but because Naya hadn't yet been ready to do it alone. The kitchen had become their safe place, where laughter and quiet glances lived, where tension had melted over simmering pots and late-night cocoa. Now Naya wanted to take that space and make something of her own. "You got it, chef," Cole said, kissing her temple and backing away with a grin. He took Luna to the porch swing, letting them sway gently under the late afternoon sky as Naya moved through the kitchen like someone relearning a dance from her childhood. She wasn't perfect with the measurements. She dropped a spoon. She burned the first round of garlic bread. But she laughed at herself, at the mess, at the way Cole peeked through the doorway, pretending not to hover. And when dinner was ready, she stood at the stove for a full minute, breathing in the aroma and the feeling of creating something not out of necessity or duty, but out of care. She carried the plates to the table, cheeks flushed, and set them down with a small smile that held galaxies. "I made dinner," she said simply. Cole looked at her, his eyes soft. "I know," he said, standing slowly. He pulled her into his arms, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered against her skin, "You're not running anymore." Nie buried her face into his shoulder and exhaled deeply. "No," she whispered, "I'm not." They ate together, laughter floating between bites of over-buttered pasta and crunchy bread. Luna made up a song about the salad and sang it off-key until they were all laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. And somewhere between the laughter and the leftovers, Naya realized something vital. This was what forgiveness looked like. Not dramatic, not loud. It didn't arrive with fanfare or applause. It came quietly, like the soft closing of a chapter that had lingered too long. It was a whisper in the mirror, a child's arms around your waist, a dinner made with trembling hands and a heart that dared to try again. Later that night, when the house was calm and the dishes done, Cole found her on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the soft glow of the lamp. He sat beside her, tucking her feet onto his lap. "You seem different," he said gently. She nodded, watching the light shift across the floor. "I forgave myself today." He didn't speak right away. He just reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's the bravest thing you've ever done." She smiled, tears forming again. But this time they weren't heavy. They were light. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for years," she whispered. "And now?" "You can breathe," Cole finished. They sat in silence for a while, no need for words. Her fingers slipped into his, and he held them gently, like someone cupping a song in their palm. The past was still there, but it no longer defined her. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened its grip. And in its place was something stronger, resilience wrapped in tenderness, healing etched into every touch and glance, and quiet promise. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't something she could wait for someone else to give her. It had to come from her. And now it had, not like a shout, not like a scream, but like a whisper. And in Cole's arms, surrounded by the rhythm of love and belonging, that whisper was loud enough to change everything. The evening settled softly over the house like a lullaby, folding the day into its arms with warm breezes and the scent of garden soil still lingering in the air. Nia had just finished reading a story to Luna, who had fallen asleep half covered in stickers and clutching a stuffed elephant to her chest. She lingered beside the bed a while longer, brushing back Luna's curls, her fingers memorizing the softness of peace, the kind of quiet that didn't come from exhaustion, but from a soul finally at rest. Downstairs, a soft glow flickered against the windows, like the house itself had lit a candle. Nia tilted her head, curious, her heart fluttering with a strange blend of anticipation and calm. She padded barefoot down the hallway, her fingers brushing the rail of the stairs, each step light and curious. When she opened the back door, her breath caught. The backyard, usually nothing more than a patch of grass and two aging lawn chairs, had transformed into something out of a quiet dream. A soft plaid blanket was spread in the center, glowing lanterns floating from the tree branches like little stars brought down to earth. Candles, carefully placed in jars, lined the edges of the yard, casting warm golden light across the garden beds. A small speaker played soft jazz, barely louder than the crickets. And at the center of it all stood Cole, his hands behind his back, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Not nervous, not performative, just present, just open. Nya stood in the doorway for a full minute, blinking, her hand pressed against her chest. "What is this?" she whispered, stepping out slowly. Cole extended a hand toward her, his voice low and steady. "A promise. But first, a picnic." He guided her to the blanket where a simple spread awaited: sandwiches, strawberries, sparkling cider, and Luna's contribution: rainbow marshmallows arranged in a heart shape. Nia laughed, the sound quiet and full of love. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice catching. Cole shrugged. Luna helped with the candles. I handled the rest. I wanted tonight to be about light, about us. They sat together, the night wrapping around them like a secret. They ate, but not much, mostly talking, mostly smiling. Nia kept catching herself staring at Cole, not because of how he looked, but because of how he looked at her. Like she wasn't something broken to be fixed, but something whole that had simply been waiting to be loved right. At one point, he reached over and brushed a crumb from her cheek, then let his fingers linger just a moment longer. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again." She tilted her head. "This?" He nodded. Hope, belonging. A future he turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight. "I never thought I'd fall again, but I fell for you in the rain, Naya, and I haven't stopped since." Naya's breath hitched, tears springing up before she could stop them. She looked away for a moment, embarrassed, but Cole reached over and gently turned her chin back toward him. "Don't hide," he said gently. "Not from me. Not ever again." And then, slowly, he got to his knees. Not with a ring, not with any elaborate speech rehearsed or written on cue cards, but with raw, open truth in his eyes. "I'm not asking for perfect," he said. "I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for every day with you. Through mess, through laughter, through the hard parts and the sacred ones. Be mine every day, no matter what comes." Nya's hands flew to her mouth as her body shook with quiet sobs. Not from pain, but from overwhelming presence. From the truth of being chosen without conditions. She dropped her hands and reached for him, pulling him up to his feet as her voice cracked through her smile. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, because it's real. Because it's us." Cole pulled her into his arms, and the kiss they shared was not the beginning of love. It was the celebration of it. It was soft, patient, and full of memory, as though every quiet glance and shared silence over the past months had led to this one breath held between them. It was not passion alone, it was the ache of home. As they pulled apart, Luna burst out of the back door, barefoot, wearing a fairy crown made of pipe cleaners and shouting, "What did I miss?" Cole laughed, scooping her up in one motion. "Your angel said yes." Nia laughed through her tears. Luna clapped her hands excitedly and then ran barefoot through the grass, spinning and twirling, shouting, "My angel stays forever. My angel stays forever." Cole and Naya watched her dance, the candlelight catching on her crown, turning her into something mythical and beautiful. They didn't say anything for a long time. They didn't need to. The backyard, lit with soft flame and childhood joy, became their sanctuary. The air smelled like strawberries and hope, and in that simple corner of the world, love had broken through every fear they'd ever known. Not with grand gestures, not with diamonds or crowds or sweeping speeches, but with whispered truths, with quiet courage, with a picnic under stars that witnessed a promise two broken hearts made, not to be perfect, but to stay. And for Nia, standing there with her arms wrapped around the only man who had ever made her feel both seen and safe, it wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finally believing that love was bigger than fear, that the rain hadn't ruined her. It had washed her clean. And now the girl who had once run barefoot through city streets to survive stood barefoot in candlelight, saying yes to a future she never thought she deserved. And love, steadfast, patient, wild, wrapped around her like a vow already fulfilled. The morning after the backyard promise, the world woke softly. Sunlight poured through gauzy curtains in ribbons of gold, and the house seemed to breathe with them, quiet and full, as though it too had exhaled a weight long held. Nye stood at the stove in Cole's shirt, flipping pancakes while humming a melody that had no name, just warmth. Cole walked in, hair still wet from the shower, holding Luna in one arm and a sleepy smile in the other. Luna reached out for Naya. who turned and kissed her cheek with a familiarity that no longer felt borrowed. "Morning, Mama," Luna said softly, and just like that, a name once feared now bloomed in full color. Naya blinked back tears, her hands stilled on the spatula, and smiled. "Morning, baby." That moment wasn't loud. It didn't need applause, but it etched itself into Naya's memory like a permanent signature, a soft exclamation mark at the end of a sentence she thought would never be written. The title of Mom didn't come from biology. It came from late-night cuddles after nightmares, from wiping sticky fingers, from brushing tears off little cheeks and saying, "I'm here." And now it came from Luna's lips without prompting, without hesitation. It came as truth. Cole noticed the shift too, the way Naya's back stood straighter, the way her eyes met the world with no flinch. Over the following weeks, their lives unfolded in slow, deliberate steps, not rushed, not perfect, but beautifully intentional. They started therapy together, not because they were broken, but because healing needed room to breathe. Cole talked about grief in ways he never had before, finally giving himself permission to speak of the ache that losing his wife had left behind. Nia talked about shame, about survivor's guilt, about the loneliness that had become her second skin. They sat beside each other on that couch, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always holding hands. Healing didn't come like a switch. It came like a sunrise, slow and golden, illuminating one corner of themselves at a time. Their house changed too, not in size but in soul. The walls were the same, but now they echoed with laughter, with Luna's drawings taped to the fridge, with Nia's humming in the mornings, with Cole's guitar drifting softly on weekend afternoons. Trust was their foundation, grace their windows. They painted the guest room into Luna's reading garden, complete with vines of paper flowers. Naya returned to nursing part-time, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, on her terms. And every time she walked through the hospital doors now, she did so not as a ghost of who she'd been, but as the woman who had risen from her own ruins. Cole watched her in awe daily. It wasn't just her beauty, though it still made his heart skip like a schoolboy's. It was her strength. The way she kissed, scraped knees, negotiated bedtime stories, and still found time to trace her fingers over his back while he fell asleep. He found himself smiling more, even laughing at things he used to ignore. His brother noticed it too. "You're lighter," he said one day over coffee. "Whatever she's doing, keep doing it." Cole didn't reply. He just smiled because there were no words big enough to hold what Naya meant to him. And then came the day. A Sunday afternoon, clouds thick with memory, and the air smelled like the moment right before rain. Nya was folding towels in the living room, Luna was playing with blocks, and Cole was nowhere in sight. "Stay here, sweetheart," Nya said to Luna, who nodded but grinned too widely for it to be innocent. Moments later, soft piano music floated in from the backyard. Curious, Naya stepped out. The yard was empty except for Luna standing under the tree with something small in her palm. She looked up at Naya, eyes bright. "I have something for you." And in that tiny palm, wrapped in a velvet ribbon, was a ring. Naya gasped, heart racing as Cole stepped out from behind the tree. He wasn't dressed up. He wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, his hair wild from the wind, but his eyes, oh, his eyes, held everything. He walked slowly, not rehearsed, not scripted, just real. He knelt beside Luna, looked up at Nia, and whispered, "We built this, brick by brick, day by day, and I never want to stop building it with you." He reached out. "Will you marry me, Nia Benton? Not because we're perfect, but because we're true." Her hands flew to her mouth again, her body trembling with that familiar ache of joy that only comes after years of learning to live again. She bent to her knees, cupped his face, and said, "Yes." Because love like this, healed like this, is everything. Luna clapped. The rain began to fall in soft whispers, and they didn't run. They stood there as it fell around them, just like it had the night they met. But this time they didn't flinch. They opened their arms, lifted their faces, and danced. Their wedding came a few months later under those same rain clouds. Nya wore white, simple, elegant and radiant, her curls pinned with pearls and her eyes free of every shadow. Cole wore navy, but he could have been wearing anything, because all anyone saw was the way he looked at her, as if she was the answer to every prayer he never dared speak aloud. Luna wore a tutu and flower crown, skipping down the aisle with more joy than tradition. Their vows were handwritten, not perfect, but honest. "I never thought I'd stop running," Naya said softly, her voice clear even over the gentle patter of rain. "But then I met you, and I stopped, and I stayed, not because you caught me, but because you waited." Cole took her hands, his thumb brushing over her knuckles like a silent "I'm here." "I didn't know love could happen twice," he said. "But then you smiled through your tears, and I remembered how to breathe." The rain kept falling, but no one left. They kissed under the clouds, laughter and applause wrapped around them like blessing. Love had not arrived dry and perfect. It had arrived soaked and sincere, and it was enough. Years later, people would ask how they met. Luna would always chime in with the same line. She was an angel in the rain, and Daddy was smart enough to stop the car. And while the story changed slightly depending on who told it, the truth never did. They had found love in the wreckage, home in the healing, and joy in every morning that followed. Their home was never the biggest, but it was always warm. Their mornings were filled with pancakes, their nights with whispered prayers and sleepy kisses. And every time it rained, Nia would stand at the window, not afraid, but grateful. Because the rain didn't take her life. It brought her back to it.